It's very humbling, let me tell you. It's very humbling. But it is good to be with you all this morning. There's no pop. That means we can keep going. My name is Caesar. I have the privilege of being the lead pastor here. And you've chosen a good time because despite the rain, and it's just stuff when I was telling someone before, I don't know what it is about Floridians, but the moment it begins to rain, it's like no one's ever seen rain before. It's like you become terrified. Like, there's no way we can leave the house. It's as if it's a hurricane. Like, it's beautiful out. Like, this is nothing, right? Just put your little boots on and you'll be fine. Anyway, we're good. We're starting, last week we started our new sermon series going through the Gospel of John, and we're calling this series Seeing Jesus, and so we're going to enter into our second week. And the whole purpose of this series is to help us more clearly understand who Jesus is and what he's done. This series is meant to give us a chance to wrestle with and through the claims that Jesus makes and to consider what the words of Jesus may mean for you today. And so this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to finish going through this section of John, which which John calls the prologue, which are the first 18 verses of John chapter 1. We're just going to it's so full and so dense, we've cut it a little bit in half, kind of 3/4 and 1/4. So we're finishing the last quarter this morning. But by way of reminder, John's prologue helps set up the narrative of the life of Jesus. If you've ever seen Star Wars, I used this analogy last week, but if you've ever seen Star Wars and the beginning credits, these words start coming up or down, whichever direction, but the words start coming, and it says in a galaxy very far away, and it gives you kind of the background to understand what you're about to watch and unfold. This is very much the same way with John's prologue. It's to give a background understanding of the world that Jesus comes into and why he comes into this world. So John gives a bird's eye view of all the major themes that he's going to cover and unpack over the course of the rest of his retelling of Jesus' life. And if you weren't here last week, you can go to Spotify or podcast or YouTube, wherever we are, and you can catch up that way. But one of the most interesting things that John focuses on as he finishes, remember, there's lots of themes. Like I could have chosen one of 6 ways to have preached the last 4 verses, but one of the interesting things that he describes Jesus as is as being full, amen, full of both grace and truth. Okay? Jesus being full of grace and truth. And you might be thinking, why does that even matter? Well, those are 2 words that we do not often put together. Christian or not Christian. Right? You'll hear people say things like, you just got to give yourself a little bit of what? Grace, as if it's some sort of free get out of jail card. Don't be so hard on yourself. Give yourself some grace. And on the flip side, you'll hear certain generations of people saying, no, what the kids need these days is just a little bit of hard truth to kick them in the butt, right? They seem to be opposed to one another. Grace is seen as kindness and acceptance, and in our world, truth is seen as cold and rigid. And our culture is built on the separation of grace and truth. So we have people, right, who promote grace as a liberty. That the only way for you to experience the fullness of life is if no one can tell you what to do. Right, like real freedom, real truth is that I get to be my own person. I get to do what I want, however I want, whenever I want, at all times. And shame on anyone if they try to tell me otherwise. And I think this is why many non-Christians are opposed to Christianity or to religion as a whole, because they see religion, and especially Christianity, they see it as a limitation of freedom. That it's all about truth and judgment and condemnation. And it's ironic, they would give up truth if it means that they can live the way they want. But then we have people on the opposite side who promote truth as simply as a structure of rules and rigidity. Like the only way for you to experience full life in their minds is to discipline yourself and to follow the rules and make sure you're a good person and have a high sense of morality. And this is the category many Christians fall into. We get stuck here and end up living a life of legalism where the way that we relate to God, the way we relate to others, the way we relate to anyone else is purely through rules and regulations, leaving no room for mistakes and failure. It's as if you're not human. It's always about trying to clean yourself up and feeling like it's never enough. Everything is simply filtered through behavior modification. And everyone becomes a self-righteous judge, focused on looking around, seeing who they can call out. You know why people do that? It's because they recognize they're not doing it well themselves. So they make themselves feel better by pointing out the failures in others. And the irony of all of this is not that grace is opposed to truth or that truth is opposed to grace. It's that every single human craves both grace and truth together. Because we want a grace that covers our brokenness, a grace that offers a place of acceptance in a world of rejection. But we're also wanting truth to anchor us in a world full of confusion, relativism, and shifting morals. We need for grace and truth to be married because grace without truth is cheap, and truth without grace is ineffectively harsh. And in the midst of this, John's words ring true again. It says, Jesus is full of grace and truth. If this is true, then what I'd like us to explore this morning is to just consider, if Jesus is full of grace and truth, what does the grace and truth of Jesus mean for us today? Let's open up our Bibles or your little booklets that we've given if you have one. We'll just begin reading in verse 14 and we'll anchor down here for a bit. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. What John is unpacking in verse 14 is this idea of the incarnation of Jesus. It's Jesus taking on flesh. I'm not going to spend too much time on this morning because next week we're going to have a whole sermon devoted to talking about the incarnation of Jesus and why that matters for us. But we still should walk through it just a bit to understand, why does John include this in a conversation about grace and truth. And so Jesus is the Word. We discovered that last week, right? If you look at your Bibles, very first verse, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was who? God. And we discovered that the Word is Jesus, therefore Jesus is God. And now I want to break this down really quickly. The Word became flesh. What does this mean? What does it mean that Jesus became flesh? Now, this word became in the English gives you this idea that he was something and then he was not something and then he became something. Like there was this kind of transformation that Jesus changed from one nature to another nature, but that's actually not true, and that's heresy. That's bad theology. That's the kind of stuff that they sends you to theological jail. That's what that is. All right, so we don't want to be people like that. What does John mean? He's talking about this term called the hypostatic union. Can you say that with me? Hypostatic union. Perfect. You are now more intelligent than more Christians than you think. So hypostatic union just means that Jesus is full 100% God and 100% man. And he's both. So it's better translated, not that Jesus became flesh, but that he took on flesh. And this matters so deeply because when you think about your human existence, what it means to be human, okay? One of our elders put it this way. Anybody here ever get bubble guts? Yeah? Guess who did too? Jesus. You know who had sleepless nights? Jesus. Jesus was the oldest brother of many children. He's the oldest brother. He had many siblings. So imagine Jesus trying to get some sleep as a kid and be like, oh God, take them away. Like he could say it. Father, remove these children. Like he would have sleepless nights. He would be hurt. He would be rejected. Like when you look at the life of Jesus, his own family rejects him. He takes on flesh in the fullness of it. Not that he just takes on humanity and has skin and bones, but he takes upon himself all that it means to be human, both the good and the bad. And if that's not enough, John says, Jesus took on flesh and he made his dwelling among us. This word for dwelling is this idea of, is an Old Testament term meaning tabernacle, to set up a tent, to make a home. You see, in the Old Testament, there was a separation between God and humanity, and the way for God to be with humanity was he created the system of the tabernacle, which allowed the presence of God to be among the people. And so before, there was this distance between God and humanity, but it says here that the distance between God and man is broken because Jesus has closed the gap. So God comes to earth, takes on flesh, bubble guts and all, and then he draws to a world. Let's be honest. Is this world all that great? No. Some of you drive the I-4. Let it be a reminder. That's how crappy this world is. And yet he makes a home here. Baffling. That perfection, God, would make a home in a broken world. Now, this is only good news if he's going to do something about it. You know, have you ever had a bad day and someone just pats you on the back and is like, it's going to be okay. It sucks, I know, but it's going to be okay. That's not what Jesus does. Look what the rest of verse 14 says, is we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So when Jesus takes on flesh, makes a home in this broken world, what does he come with? Grace and truth. But then we have to consider, what does grace and truth mean? What do those words actually mean? What does John mean by grace and truth? Well, this is another Old Testament connection that he's trying to make. Just like he made with the tabernacle, he's trying to make a connection between grace and truth and this passage in Exodus. It'll be on the screen. Exodus 34, 6 through 7. This is God, in the Old Testament, disclosing himself, revealing himself to humanity. And he says, this is how I want you guys to see me. And God, he passed in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, he's giving them his name, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. So let's just stop there for a second. That part sounds good, right? Man, God's compassionate. He is gracious. He's slow to anger. He's abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands. Oh my gosh, we just did communion. He loves me. He accepts me. And then he says, yet, he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. This is the part of God we don't like. This is the part we don't like to read. But the reason why John is making this connection is because he's trying to say the same way that the Old Testament people saw God in this way, we are to see Jesus in this same way. And this is a good thing that he does not leave the guilty unpunished, because there is injustice in this world, brokenness in this world. Do you not want him to address it? Of course you do, unless you're the one who's causing the problem. But do you see that God is not revealed as grace and no truth, or truth and no grace, but that God is revealed as both grace and truth. You see, this verbiage of grace and truth, when it's filtered through this Old Testament passage, reveals that Jesus is faithful and loving. See, this description of who God is this idea of covenant. That he sees you as you are and moves not from you, but towards you. See, it is the grace and truth of Jesus that comes into contact with our world of death and brokenness. It is the grace and truth of Jesus that assures us that in our most hopeless of circumstances, Jesus will draw near. How do I know that? Because Jesus came to a broken world and he took on flesh to be like and to mediate and to sympathize and to recognize what it means to be human. So your bubble guts and all, your broken mind, your broken heart, your broken body. He knows what it is to be that way. He knows what it is to live in a world of rejection and brokenness and hatred and anger. He received all of those things, and yet the way he approaches us, he approaches humanity and the world, is with grace and truth. If he did it then, do you think he will stop doing it now? Of course not. This is meant to be of such great comfort to us. Because he comes both with grace and truth. He sees it as it is, truth. And then he reveals all that he is. That's grace. And this is why this is comforting, because you don't need someone to gaslight you into thinking, oh, well, he's not that bad. I mean, we've experienced this, even in the church. No, listen, there are kids in Africa. Have anyone like your parents pull this on you or maybe you're a parent who does this? Your kid doesn't want to eat, and you go, "Do you know how many kids in Africa would want this? You know how you? Do you think I care? Like as a kid, I didn't care. We gaslight each other all the time, and we think that Christianity is all about gaslighting. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. It'll get better. It's okay. No, it is that bad. That's why God came near. It is that your life is that miserable. This is why you need Jesus. This is why you need his grace and truth. Jesus sees things as they are and responds with what is necessary. And this reminds that Jesus is always on the way. Always on the way. He drew near then, and he draws near now. Now, Jesus wants us to experience not just being in the presence of his grace and truth, but he also wants us to receive grace and truth. Look what he says here in verses 15 through 17. John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me.'" We won't get too much into this because we're going to talk about John the Baptist in a few weeks. But I want you to just focus on verses 16 and 17. Out of his fullness, out of the fullness of Christ, we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Again, we see that the grace and truth comes through Jesus, but we got to break this down real quick. Verse 16 is saying that there's that out of whose fullness? Christ's fullness comes grace in place of grace already given. Now, the question that comes to mind then, what was the grace that needed to be replaced by more grace? What is this grace that he is talking about? Well, we see here in verse 17, for, that word for connects verse 16 and 17. So he says, there's two kinds of graces being given. And verse 17 says this, the first grace is the law that was given through Moses, and the second grace was the grace and truth that came through Jesus Christ. Now, here's the thing. Have you ever looked at the law and thought, that's really graceful? Like, have you ever seen our criminal system and be like, that is so gracious? No. We've never considered it that way. So how is it that law and truth, how could the law of Moses be considered a grace? See, the law of Moses, if you didn't know this, the Old Testament people, the Israelites, were given 613 commandments about how to live life. 613. Okay? That's a lot of ways to mess up. Like that's what it is. 613 ways that God gave them to know how to live with one another and how to be in relationship with him. Now, the law was a form of grace because it allowed the people of God to have a healthy standard of living with one another and with God. See, people don't take this seriously when we think people aren't naturally good. I just want you to know that. And if you don't believe me, I encourage all of you to at least serve in kids ministry once in your life. Truthfully. It's not because like kids are the worst, it's just they're broken like the rest of us. No filter, no nothing. And what do parents, what's the responsibility of the parents to help them become a productive, like a member of society, and maybe hide it. Listen, we know you're bad, just don't be that bad in front of others. But we don't outgrow that. We don't outgrow our brokenness. We don't outgrow our anger. We don't outgrow our jealousy. We don't outgrow our comparison. We don't outgrow all the things that make us broken as humans. We don't outgrow it. It's not a phase. It's not like being emo when you're in high school and then being a jock in college. Like this. No, you don't outgrow your brokenness. It is who you are. And so God gives this law as a standard to say, hey, you have no idea how to love one another well, so let me teach you. You have no idea what it means to be in my presence, so let me teach you. It was actually a form of grace. Look at how Jesus summarizes these laws in Matthew 22. He says this, Jesus replied, all 613 commandments can be summarized this way. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commandments. Do you see, the law isn't about being harsh. It was about being taught by God how to love others and how to love him. Now, while the law of Moses was a grace, it was insufficient because it became a burden. 613 commandments. Listen, y'all, I go over the speed limit every day. I'm not always kind to my wife. I'm selfish in my heart. 613 commandments. I barely can keep one. Maybe some of you can keep two, but 613? See, to live in the truth of the law of God is insufficient because it doesn't have the power to change anyone. This is why we need the grace and truth of Jesus. It's not just grace that we need, but it's also the truth that we need. We cannot divorce the grace and truth of Jesus because Jesus actually has the same standards as the law. Look what Matthew 5:17 says. Do not think that I have come to abolish or to get rid of the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So what this is showing is that Jesus actually takes the place of the law and does what the law is supposed to do. Now, this might make you feel uncomfortable because what this means is that Jesus has come to expose your brokenness. He's come to expose the failures and mistakes you've made. Those things that you wish no one would see about you. He's come to expose it. But why? It's so that he would cover it in grace. See, Jesus is the truth that exposes our sin, failures, and inadequacies, and then with grace, Jesus heals and frees. It is gracious for Jesus to reveal your brokenness because your brokenness needs healing. It does not need someone to turn a blind eye to it. So many of us walk around wounded and live in that way because we don't want anyone to touch it. But imagine, it's like being stabbed, going to the emergency room and saying, hey doc, I'm bleeding out, but please don't touch it. See how silly that sounds? No, you want that doctor to get in there. You want it to disinfect it and to stitch it up and to get in there and make sure you're not internally bleeding and your organs are not popping out. You want the doctor to fix you and to heal you. But the only way for that to happen is if he can expose it. He can see it, look at it, touch it, get in there and make it whole again. And so Jesus does the same with us. He needs to get in there. He needs to touch it, disinfect it, make it clean, make it whole, heal you. But here's what we do as people. We offer him fake versions of ourselves. Jesus cannot heal the fake version of you. He cannot fix the fake brokenness. He can only fix and heal the things that you give on to him. And he does not turn a blind eye to it. See, what many of us need is a fresh dose of the grace of Jesus to put our legalistic truth into check. See, many of us in the church, what we experience is a lot of law, a lot of truth, and no grace. And if we put the law on people, all we do is just beat them into obligation with no love for Jesus. Listen, do you know why some of us never change, no matter how long we're Christians? Why some of us as Christians have for a long time battled the same sin and brokenness and haven't grown up in maturity in our faith? Do you know why? It's not because you're not trying hard enough. I know plenty of Christians who try all the time. It's because too many of us, we live in the Christian walk through the law, which is just bondage for our souls, instead of the grace and truth of Jesus that exposes and heals and changes and transforms. The law without grace is bondage, and so Jesus gives us truth with grace to set us free, to change us from the inside out. Church, listen, we have an opportunity to be a community of grace and truth. Hear that for just a second. We, It's not just what Jesus offers us, it's what we get to offer the world. This is the only way we will grow into the people God has designed us to be. We need words of truth and love to reverberate in this space and in our conversations with one another. Listen to what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. This means that the only way for any of us to actually grow in our faith, to be transformed, to be changed, is not just truth. It's truth with grace. No one's ever changed because they've been told their whole life they suck. But they have been changed when someone says, even when you do suck, I love you and will welcome you and receive you. That changes everything. Do you hear and receive how radical this could be for us as a people and for those who come into this space? We're all yearning for grace and truth. We're all looking for an unshakable and unchanging grace and truth. And guess what? We know where to find it. Jesus. And as we receive the grace and truth of Jesus, the unimaginable happens. Let's read this final verse together. Verse 18. No one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in the closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. Now, this verse seems kind of out of place, a little disconnected from what we've just read. It doesn't even mention grace and truth. What are we talking about here? What does it mean? No one has seen God. No one has seen God. Actually, the one and only time that someone asked to see the fullness of God was Moses back in Exodus. And God says, if I show you the fullness of who I am, I will eviscerate you. You will die, homie. And so he doesn't do it because he's kind. So no one has seen God except for who? Who does John say has seen God, the Father? Jesus. Who is himself? Why? Because he's God. And is the closest relationship with the Father. Now, the phrase or the word used for the phrase closest relationship is actually the Greek word for the word bosom. It's the chest. It's where the heart lies. And so here's what John is saying. Jesus has not just seen God, but he knows the Father's heart because he is closest to the Father's heart. And then he says right after that, and he makes him known. What do you think Jesus is seeking to reveal to you? It's the Father's heart. You see, what he's saying is the Father's heart is full of grace and truth. Everything that we've just read about until this point happens because the Father's heart is full of grace and truth. And this whole time, what Jesus has been doing through this passage has been offering to pour his grace and truth over all those who believe in him. Why? For you see, Jesus is not satisfied just so that you would know the Father's heart, but because he's only satisfied if you are forever on the Father's heart. Do you see the difference? You can know it, but Jesus wants you to always be in the Father's heart. For you see, full life, true life comes in by being in relationship with the Father. Jesus says in John 14:6, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. And what Jesus is disclosing even there, he says, the way, the truth, the life, you want to experience life, you want to experience truth, you can only get that through the Father. But guess what? You can't be with the Father unless you come through me. Jesus is what bridges you to life and truth that only comes from the Father. Jesus secures that we would be on the Father's heart. How does Jesus assure, not that we would just know the Father's heart, but be on the Father's heart? It's because he displays the most beautiful act and ultimate act of grace and truth. The ultimate act of grace and truth in the scriptures is what Jesus does on the cross. Because it was on the cross where Jesus saw the fullness of your sin and my sin. It was on the cross where Jesus saw the brokenness of humanity. It's where Jesus saw everything that you wish no one would know to be true about you. And yet, the author of Hebrews says, with joy, he endures the cross. He sees you as you are, as he finds you. And on the cross, he demonstrates both truth and grace, every single ounce of blood. is spilled for you. See, grace and truth cannot be divorced because grace and truth is who God is. Our salvation is contingent not on just grace or on truth, but on grace and truth of Jesus. And it's because of the grace and truth of Jesus, y'all. Grace and truth is how God interacts with you every day from here to eternity. Don't you see it? Can you see it? This is the mission and power of Jesus' grace and truth. It comforts us in our brokenness and it frees us from our bondage so that we would be in full relationship with the Father who gives life to his children. What John has disclosed here this morning is that the grace and truth of Jesus leads us to a life of fullness. Grace and truth is now your life. For those who believe in Jesus, you can have the life of fullness. This is what Colossians chapter 2 says. For in Christ all the fullness of the deity, meaning God, lives in bodily form. And in Christ, why? For you to be brought to the fullness of his life. This whole text has shown the lengths Jesus would go to bring us into the fullness of life and shows the lengths he will go to stay with us. You see, what Jesus is offering you this morning through his grace and truth is this one dynamic and yet beautiful and freeing reality. Jesus offers you the opportunity to be fully known and fully loved, both grace and truth. See, his truth reveals all that we are, and his grace reveals all that he is. I love how Tim Keller puts it. He says, to be loved, but not known is comforting but superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. But, to be fully loved and to be truly known, well, that's a lot like being loved by God. It is what we need more than anything. It liberates us from pretense. It humbles us out of our self-righteousness and fortifies us for any difficulty life can throw at us. Jesus wants to fully know you and to fully pour his love on you. This is good news. This is what we yearn for, is it not? Because no one else gets to know you. For those who are married, your spouse doesn't know you. Your friends don't actually know you. No one fully knows you and will accept you and love you because you're just too broken, let's be honest. Except for Jesus. Because he's seen all that you are. He knows all that you are, past, present, and future, and still loves you. To be fully loved, to be truly known, is freedom. And the grace and truth of Jesus does not run out, for it is a grace upon grace. Meaning for you, if you're a sinner, what do you receive? Grace. If you're broken, you receive grace. For your failures, there is grace. For your mistakes, there is grace. Even when you've done things right, you still need the grace of God to make up for the parts that aren't great. Grace upon grace. This is what Paul means in Romans 5:20 when he says, wherever sin and brokenness is in us, the grace of God abounds all the more. And hear this morning before we finish. It is not just that we have our messiness here and that we need the grace of God to meet it like they're equal. No, what Paul is saying is that the grace of God is like a cascading waterfall of grace that it drowns out your brokenness so you'll be free, healed, and whole. This is John's depiction of who Jesus is. And so I ask you this morning, have you met him? Do you know this Jesus? Have you beheld him? Even in the service, did you know this is who you were singing to? Did you know this is who you were talking to? This man who drew near to us in a world of death so he can give us grace and truth. I'm not asking you if you've prayed your prayers. I'm not asking if you've gone to church, or I'm not asking if you're reading your Bible. I'm asking you, have you met Jesus full of grace and truth? And I tell you, you must know him. You must know him and experience his grace and truth. That is your only hope. And for the Christians in this room, that question goes for you too. Have you met him? Do you know Jesus in this way? Do you know Jesus as grace and truth? Or have you been living under the weight of law with no grace? Maybe it's been a while for some of you. Maybe you've only felt like you've experienced the law and not any grace. Here's what I'll tell you this morning. Christian, do whatever it is that you can to get under the waters of his grace and truth. Perhaps you've been too busy to spend time with Jesus. Perhaps you've been too distracted. Perhaps you've been too angry. Perhaps he's not who you thought he was, and so you're wrestling. And what I'm saying is wrestle, wrestle, and wrestle, and wrestle, and wrestle until you see him for who he is, Jesus, full of grace and truth. What we need is the freedom and the anchoring of the grace and truth of Jesus. May we be a church of grace and truth. May we be a people of grace and truth. May we live in the grace and truth of Jesus. Let's pray.